I think we need to put those doctors on stage more.
Yeah.
The Dr. Barodi of the world, the Dr.
Yeah.
Feingold of the world. I don't want to see Academy Awards. I want to see doctors that have changed healthcare. Wafik El-Dari, his
Right.
work on P53. Dr. Barodi, his work on fecal transplant.
Right.
Dr. Paul Furstad, at Yale, his work on the microbiome. Sahil Khanna, his work on the microbiome and chronic urinary tract infection.
Yeah.
Colleen Kelly, Brown University, 2 cases of alopecia areata improved. Alex Karutz, the first stool bank
Yeah.
available. That doesn't mean they have all the answers, but they were brave enough to try. I
Right.
want to see those doctors being acknowledged. I want to see the scientists behind the BRCA gene be acknowledged. Not just the businessman pushing that.
Welcome to Demystifying PANS and PANDAS, the podcast where we uncover the mysteries, breakthroughs, and hope behind these life-altering conditions. I'm Dr. Nancy O'Hara, a board-certified pediatrician, educator, and advocate with over 3 decades of experience helping children and families navigate the challenges of neurodevelopmental and neuropsychiatric conditions, especially PANS and PANDAS. These disorders can feel overwhelming, but here we'll break down the science, explore transformative treatments, and share stories of resilience and recovery. If you've ever wondered what's possible for your child or how to find answers, this is the place to start. Let's dive in.
Welcome, everybody. It's Dr. Nancy O'Hara at Demystifying PANS, PANDAS again. And I really am excited to welcome Dr. Sabine Hazan. Dr. Hazan is not only an incredible gastroenterologist, internist, hepatologist, she's the CEO of Progenabiome, Ventura Clinical Trials, co-founder of Topilia Therapeutics, expert on the gut flora and the microbiome, and just really a cutting-edge medical researcher. She's a writer, editor, world-renowned speaker, and published author of one of my favorite titles, Let's Talk Yes Shit. There is an exclamation point there rather than the I, but Sabine has changed the lives and the world of so many people by her cutting-edge research in everything poop. And Sabine, Dr. Hazan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, I want to know, and I do know this, but please tell our listeners how you got started in shit.
I think it was kind of serendipitous. If I go back all the way to when I was a kid, I asked God, where do we go after we die? And I think he led me into the microbiome, mainly because I was always obsessed with where do we go after what happens to the body when it decomposes, right? And when you think about it, microbes in your gut decompose your body and put you back into the ground. So these microbes are really alive. So really, that was a path for me to understand the microbiome. And it started kind of gradually, right? It started as a challenge. You can't get into GI. We don't take women in GI. And I, took on the challenge and said, well, I'm going to be your first woman. And then, then it was a challenge of, you can't have kids and be a gastroenterologist. And I'm like, well, I'm going to do it. And then it was a challenge of, you don't need to do, to look into the microbiome. We've already looked at it. And it was 2 guys, scientists, that said that to me. And I said, 2 sets of eyes have looked at the microbiome and you figured it all out? Well, I guess I'm going to look at it. So it was really the biggest challenge. I think also what spun this challenge was really, really the fact that I was kind of pushed to it in a way because I come from a world of doing GI and having had a difficult time surviving as a woman gastroenterologist, surrounded by men gastroenterologists. I kind of had to create my niche. And my niche was doing clinical trials for pharma. So I was the girl that was basically doing the clinical trial on biologics for all sorts of, for not only Crohn's disease, but all sorts of conditions. And, I was also the girl that started at University of Florida in GI because the challenge was we don't take women. So I said, well, how about if I do a year of research and I'll show you how I am, and then you can accept women, right? So, and I graduated with the Dean's Research Award at University of Florida as the first woman GI. So I think it started from there. My attending at the time at University of Florida, and I love him. He was the chair of the program, said to me, "You're really good in research. You really should continue it." And so I kind of deviated from doing, thousands of colonoscopies to basically doing clinical trials for pharma. And when clinical trials for pharma, became C. diff and feces in a capsule, my friend and someone that I really admire and love, Dr. Neil Stolman,
Yeah.
told me years ago, he said, the future is in shit. And I said, please don't make me play with it. I really, when there's a colonoscopy, I'm usually out of there. So it's kind of, there's an irony there, right? And there's also a courage that you take on to say, wait a minute, what did I do when I took stools and I put it in a physician that has C. diff, and the physician is still alive and doing great and survived C. diff? What is in poop, right? So then you force yourself to get over that yuck feeling. And I remember the first patient, ulcerative colitis. My coordinator was not around, and I was the one collecting the. I nearly passed out. And then you get over that yuck feeling and you take on the courage. And next thing you know, you're on a safari taking stool samples of all the animals instead of taking pictures of the animals. So I think it was a series of challenges, a series of roadblocks, a series of you can't do that. You shouldn't do that. You won't do that. That, were the chips on my shoulder that basically said, well, guess what? I'm going to do it, and I'm going to keep focusing on doing it, and I'm going to persist. And, that's what we are as women,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
We can't be told, a free woman, a spirited woman, a passionate woman doesn't get told how to dress, how to act, how to be. She just does it.
Yep.
And even the book, Let's Talk Shit, I had so many people say, you shouldn't call it that. It's not appropriate. It's vulgar. You're vulgar. And I said, you know what? I don't want to sugarcoat it anymore. And why is
Right.
it vulgar? The
Right.
top book in the top bookseller was The Art of Not Giving a F. And
Yeah.
that was popular by a man, but a woman saying, let's talk shit is not popular?
I,
No.
I can't tell you, and I won't spend our hour together telling you how much we have in common. But even though I didn't get into shit and I chose another form,
Yes.
our early beginnings and how we got started have so many. I'll just one quick story. I had an orthopedic surgeon after I had killed it with 5 other men. I had done better than all of that kind of stuff. He sat us all down and asked the 5 men what area of medicine they were going to go into. And he asked me what I was making for dinner. And my
Oh my
answer
God, I
was,
know.
I don't know. My husband cooks. And what was even worse is 4 of the 5 men who were going into orthopedic surgery, neurosurgery, and general surgery didn't even see that there was anything wrong with his question. It was only the guy going into family practice that apologized for all of them. And those sort of things put a fire in our belly and make us say,
100%.
not again. We're going to keep fighting this fight.
I
Yeah.
used to be in a group practice of GI when I first started on my own and got myself into a lot of, chaos because I was competing with the boys. And then basically the next go around, I decided to join a group of men physician. And one of the physicians said, you don't belong as a gastroenterologist. You belong in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And what do you say in those times when people say that? And basically I said, well, actually I belong in the kitchen and in the GI lab.
Exactly.
And I'm cooking my own recipes to fix patients. So guess what? And by the way, let me just tell you, it is serendipitous and it is kind of funny that it is a woman that as a woman, I'm kind of spearheading this microbiome research because the intuition that the microbiome was passed on from mother to child was really with my own pregnancies,
Yeah.
carrying a child in my first year residency, and craving salads and lettuce. And my kid, that's all she eats.
Yeah.
And then the second kid, I craved chicken nuggets and French fries from McDonald's, complete junk food. And that's all she eats, right? And I'm like, wow, how funny that I was craving the food that my kid was dictating for me to eat,
Yeah.
right? Or did I eat the food and then start, making their microbiome addicted? Who knows? There's so many answers there. But that was the first intuition for me, was just from the experience of my pregnancies. And I said, wow, how, and I went into this field, by the way, of understanding the microbiome, not just for, to understand autism, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, but really to understand my two girls. What was
Yeah.
different with my two girls' microbiomes? How could I prevent them from having a virus down the road? How do I make them stronger? It was really, that's why. And I tell my girls, they're my inspiration,
Yeah.
because we as moms function by constantly being these warriors for our kids.
Right.
It's no surprise to me how the pandemic went, and it was all women that stood up,
Yeah.
and women that are like, enough is enough already. You're feeding us
Exactly.
crap, you're giving crap to our kids, you're telling us to do this and that when a baby is born. Enough.
Yeah.
What happened to the old mother holding on her baby? And also, I think as women, and we could go on this, we've been put on this shelf to do too much, right? Like, this liberation is like, okay, yes, I can do it all.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that's a lot that we're doing. We are the moms, taking care of the kids. We're taking care of the house. We're taking care of the husband. We're taking care of the job. And as a gastroenterologist, I'm sure you can, relate to this. It's a huge entourage that we need to be able to be there at work for our patients. And I don't
Yeah.
think our patients realize that. It's much easier for my husband to go to work as a cardiologist, and he never had to worry about anything. Me, on the other hand, I had to juggle, seeing my patient, but making sure my nanny was picking up my kid,
Yeah.
and making sure there was milk in the kitchen for her to eat cereal. So we have a hard job as women,
Yeah.
and that's probably why heart disease is on the up and up with women.
Yeah.
We do a lot.
Well, and
And
I always say in all my lectures, they are the weaker gender.
we won't
I,
call them that
you
because
know,
we have to be
eh,
sensitive to them,
I
but I think that's
understand.
why God made women responsible for carrying
Yeah.
children. He
Yeah.
knew we could handle it.
But
So
something
if you
else you
want to if
say
you want to get something done, by the way, give it to a busy woman. She'll do it
exactly.
like that.
Exactly. But getting back to the gut, one of the other things that I've heard you say that I so agree with is the gut isn't the second brain, it's the first brain. And the gut brain connection and what you're saying about your intuition and all of that, it all starts in the gut. And I think one of the first patients you did a fecal transplant with, you saw their Alzheimer's improve, right? Wasn't that
Yes, yes.
yeah, and
That
that
was an
gut
that
brain
was an
connection.
100%, and that was the N of one. A dear colleague and esteemed professor passed away last week, Dr. Tom Barodi, so I have to
Yeah.
acknowledge him. He was the pioneer of fecal transplant. He really was the face, the courageous doctor outside of academia that basically pushed the data, pushed the writing on fecal transplant and C. diff. It took, the whole idea of fecal transplant, taking stools from a healthy donor and putting it into a non-healthy, started in the 50s, and Dr. Brody in the 80s started taking it to the next level for multiple conditions. And I remember meeting him. Neil Stolman introduced us years ago, and Neil said, Dr. Hazen is the other physician that improved Crohn's disease by fecal transplant. So he kind of lit up and he said, who are you? Where are you from? So he kind of like saw a mini Tom Barodi in him. We kind of have the same sense of humor, same perseverance, same
Yeah.
tenacity. And so it was kind of, I said to him, I said, well, I didn't only fix a few patients with Crohn's, I actually improved Alzheimer's in one patient. The mini mental status was 21 and we went up to 29. And he said to me, "You need to write this case."
Yeah.
And I said, "Dr. Barodi, you don't understand. I'm not the girl that's going to sit down at my desk and look for references and write the paper. I'm the girl that you're going to basically be giving 10 clinical trials on new drugs, and I'm going to make them happen and bring on patients in those clinical trials." And he said to me, he said, "No, you need to write this data. This is an epic N of one that's going to change the narrative of Alzheimer's." And so I did. I tried to publish it. We had a lot of difficulties publishing it. It took probably about a lot of years to publish it. And when I published it, it was a paradigm change. It was all of a sudden people were like, "Wait, what? What's going on?" And then with Alzheimer's. And then I said to him, I said, because he said to me, he goes, "Wait till you see the data with Dr. Dr. Adams on autism and fecal transplant."
Right.
He said, "You're going to be bombarded with kids with autism." And I said, "I don't take care of kids, Dr. Barodi. It's not going to happen." And if you know my path, and my path was one of discovery with that case of Alzheimer's, I basically went to Dr. Feingold. And again, it was all divine intervention. Someone from Facebook said, "Do you know Dr. Feingold? You need to meet up with him." And I met up with him and I showed him my data on Alzheimer's. I showed him the mini mental status before it was published. And he lit up because his whole work was on Alzheimer's. And he gave me a paper and he said, "I gave this paper to a dozen pharmaceutical companies to reproduce this data, to publish it, to look for this microbe and to isolate this microbe and say, this is the microbe for Alzheimer's," right? Because back then, that's what he believed, and he had the technology of culturing. And then he said to me, "Keep this paper in a safe. And then when you have your lab, a genetic sequencing lab, you're going to understand the microbiome and you're going to prove me right." And I kept it in the safe, but I was like, great. I mean, amazing man, brilliant, spent his life understanding microbes, lived till, and by the way, one of the reasons I kind of was so fond of him is he was still playing tennis at 96.
Oh, I know.
And I was like, I want to be like this guy. I want to be sharp at 97 and still focusing and telling the story. He ended up dying during the Woolsey fire. I got all his patents and papers, and that was at the same time that I got a patent. I saw a patent with Dr. Barodi and his name on it for fecal transplant with autism.
Yep.
And that's how Dr. Barodi, so it was kind of a chain of event that got me to meet Dr. Barodi. And then Dr. Barodi and I started talking every night.
Wow.
And he said to me, "You're going to be bombarded with autism." And I said, "It's not going to happen." But sure enough, the month shortly after Dr. Feingold passed away, and one of my friends is a producer of a show and in Hollywood, and called me and goes, "Can you fix this kid? He's 17 years old with autism and he's banging his head and breaking his teeth. Can you fix him?" And I go, "Honestly, I don't know. I'm just stepping into this. I'm happy to look at it." And so the mom was a warrior. I fell in love with the mom. I fell in love with the father, the kid. And I said, "You know what? I'm going to help." And we realized, I realized anyways, it was becoming an expensive venture.
Yeah.
Because once you start, so I have a portal with the FDA, which is like a portal where you submit all these clinical trials, right? And because I had a portal with the FDA, I'm able to submit what's called an IND. And so I submitted this as an IND because when you do fecal transplant, that's not C. diff. So we first looked for C. diff in this kid, but he was constipated. He didn't have diarrhea, didn't have C. diff. So when we found that it wasn't C. diff, we basically said, okay, well, let's look at how we can get the FDA to approve this case. It took us 3 years, and COVID got in the middle of all this with this case. a case that should have been like a slam dunk 20,000 ended up costing hundreds of thousands of dollars of regulatory, because every time it's much easier now, thanks to, a lot of things, we've gotten so much better
Right.
at answering. And, it's always the first one that you do for fecal transplant. That's the hardest to kind of like go through the loopholes. Um, and so basically what happened was we kind of discovered that, through that, this path of this kid, we discovered, it was during COVID. And my first thought was, I'm supposed to be testing the donor, which is the sister. So obviously, I'm going to do the stools that are required by the FDA, but I'm also going to think further what could cause a problem. Could COVID in the stools cause a problem? If I use the stools of a kid with COVID, am I not risking the life of another kid of the sibling? And so basically what happened to me was I started becoming obsessed with finding COVID in the stools.
Yep.
And we were the first lab to identify COVID in the stools. I worked with, I told Scott Jackson at the beginning of the pandemic, who worked for NIST, National Institute of Standard, brilliant guy. I told him, I said, I think it's in the stools. There's a PCR paper from China that shows it's in the stool. He started looking at the septic tanks. And because of that paper, I started looking at human feces that were positive for COVID. So we were the first paper
Yep.
that was published in Gut Pathogen as showcasing the whole genome of COVID. That paper was a landmark paper of the pandemic
Correct.
that should have gotten us to say, hey, maybe in order to survive COVID, we need to look at the stools.
Right.
Maybe in order to survive COVID, we need to pay attention to what is the microbiome doing in COVID patients. So, and that should have been from the beginning, right? It should have
Right.
been, yes, you can do your vaccine plan, but don't forget about early treatment. And don't forget about continuing to analyze the microbiome. And don't forget to continue the animal studies, right?
Yep. And
When
just to be clear, what you were showing is that one of the things you showed, at least, is that those who got COVID had no bifidobacterium, right?
Correct, that came
And those
after.
who never
Yeah,
got COVID had lots of bifido. I mean, I know that was after this
100%.
landmark study, but there were so many things you showed in COVID. I
Yes.
mean, it was a
And,
game changer.
and here's the thing. I felt like I was the one that needed to do that. I felt like, who's doing the study? Why isn't anybody doing these studies? These are crucial studies to get us to understand. And also, this was the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
How did I survive? How did all my patients survive? How did I lose no one during the pandemic? Right? At a time, and what did I do to help patients? And what was done to certain patients that didn't follow the protocol, and why did those die, right?
Yeah.
So I think it was an important lesson. It was an important research that needed to be done. It was a hard research to be done. And I tell you, I think if it wasn't for all the roadblocks that happened in my life of everybody, trying to stop me at every step of my life, I would have not developed the courage to do what I did.
Yeah.
It's really when you suppress a spirit and you say you can't do it, that spirit lights up and says, well, I'm going to show you that I can do it.
Yeah.
And then you keep moving. And so, yes, it was literally, I became a hurricane because it was important to show the data. And I showed it. Think about it. I showed it with a new technology that nobody understood or understands.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty, is that no academician can come to me and say, Dr. Hazan is full of it because she doesn't know. Because guess what? My rebuttal is going to say, well, if you know it, what does Blottia do? Is Blottia a good microbe or a bad microbe? And by the way, what's a normal microbiome?
Right.
Because we're all different. And what does autism look like? And what's the best microbiome to put in a kid with autism? So you counteract the negative and the criticism with questions.
Yeah.
because questions that have no answers keep the person quiet to be humble.
Right.
Because what we saw during the pandemic was a lack of humility in science. And
Yes.
although I probably appear as, because people have said, oh my God, she's so arrogant. I'm not arrogant. I'm confident about what I saw during the pandemic. That
Right.
doesn't mean I'm right. I could be wrong. But guess what? Prove me wrong.
Right.
Prove me wrong.
And you have hundreds of publications behind you that show these differences in the microbiome in those with COVID, without. They'll be in
It's
the
non-debatable
text.
anymore.
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
non-debatable. When we found COVID in the stools and the government started looking at the septic tanks and started tracing the virus through the feces, my paper, that was a landmark paper, should have not been retracted, should have been the landmark paper.
Right.
When we showed loss of bifidobacteria, China reproduced that data. Japan reproduced that data. Academic centers are reproducing that data.
Right.
When we're talking about long COVID now, you cannot ignore long COVID and say it's just the virus. It's the microbiome that's altered. Now, granted, it could be from the spike protein of the virus, could be from the spike protein of the vaccine, but regardless, it is a microbiome issue.
Yeah.
Whether the microbiome issue happened before they
Yeah.
got COVID and they destroyed their bifidobacteria, or the family is living in a toxic environment, or there's toxicity in the house, stressors, anxiety, pressures that killed the microbiome, alcohol, drugs killing the microbiome, or you got COVID, killed the bifidobacteria, or you treated COVID with a
Right.
medication that killed your bifidobacteria
Exactly.
and you could not bounce back.
One thing I wanted to feed into is a little bit more on autism, because, before I got into PANS Pandas, secondary, thanks to my own son, I first taught kids with autism, and then, was a specialist in caring for kids with autism. By the way, when I was teaching kids with autism, Feingold was one of my early mentors in looking at things in that way in kids with autism. So the
He
circle
was
of life
amazing.
between the two, it's incredible. But,
Yes.
as Jim Adams has said, as you have shown, the differences in the microbiome in autism, the loss of bifidobacterium, the lack of a diverse microbiome
Right.
is quite impactful. And with fecal transplant, in your studies and Jim's studies, the increase in the diversity of the microbiome through the fecal engraftment has been incredible. Can you just talk on that a little bit more?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there's going to be a time where we're going to start thinking about, the right donor, right? So I
Yeah.
think this is the Dr. Adams studies were brilliantly done and were, started opening the idea of loss of bifidobacteria. And in fact, that's what we reproduced, right? When we saw that first case, he had loss of bifidobacteria when we compared it to the family. Um, from there, the idea of who is the best donor, what's a good donor to give, right? And remember, we're in a world right now where, the toxicity is so intense that you're
Yeah.
dodging the bullet, right? I mean, you go on a cruise, you're going to get bombarded with thousands and trillions of viruses, right? So, we're constantly exposed from not only pesticides, the foods we're eating, the spraying, they're trying to keep us in these pure little bubbles. But humans are not meant to stay in a bubble.
Right.
Humans are supposed to be touching the ground, touching the grass. And when the ground is no longer viable because it's been killed to the max, and, a good testimony, a good way to look at that is to take dirt. And if you don't even see worms in there, the dirt's no longer good, right? I mean, that every
So
farmer will
true.
tell you, you need worms. And when you've killed off all those worms and those parasites in the dirt, you're not letting you're not letting things happen, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, the Dr. Adams studies were just amazing at showing that loss of diversity. But now we need to kind of step back and say, what killed the diversity? What are we doing?
Yeah.
Because here's the problem. Yes, engraftment is very important. and following, in my opinion, anybody that does fecal transplant and doesn't follow the engraftment is wasting their time. And the problem is in the microbiome space, I hate to say it, there's not many labs out there that have that level of quality and validation and reproducibility that can
Yeah.
show that. Okay. Um, and so when you start looking at engraftment, you start kind of seeing, yes, the kid is working, but here's the other complex problem is that if you're putting the kid back in the environment of toxicity, your engraftment is gone, right?
Exactly. Which is
Because
what we see clinically all the time.
yes, yes. And then so when people come to me and say, well, my kid had fecal transplant, but it didn't help. The first thing I say is, who's your donor? And did you correct
Yes.
the environment? And by the way, as I was about to start this podcast with you, I was really thinking how difficult it is to treat one patient. I have one patient right now that's very difficult to manage. And it's not a question of fecal transplant. It's a question of the whole environment,
Yeah.
the whole dynamic in the family, the fact that nobody's watching. So this is a person that's, got Alzheimer's.
So,
And it takes more than the wife to take care of that patient. It takes a whole, it takes aides. Those are expensive. It takes a cook. That's expensive. It takes the right environment, the right renovations in the house. That's expensive. It takes a nutritionist to explain to the parents what are the foods. It takes a psychologist to remind the parents to not neglect the other children in the house because those children are impacted by
yeah.
a kid that has autism, and you have to keep the balance. It also takes a psychologist to kind of like empower the mom to stay strong, because too often these moms are just running short, and
And
they're
sick themselves.
sick themselves because they've killed their microbiome trying
Yeah.
to help their kids, and so the stress level to stay up all night, to worry about the foods, to make sure the kid has the right yogurt, to overlook that the school is giving the right nutrition, to overlook, that the kid is not being bullied,
Yeah.
that's a lot. That's a lot for a mom. And we unfortunately do not have, the structure that can help these moms. And I think I stepped into this and did all this research hurricane style because I really felt sorry for these moms. I have a big heart for humanity, although humanity was kind of disappointing during COVID, I got to tell you,
Yeah.
because the price of the stock mattered more than the price of a life. And, but I have a heart. And, these moms are tough. I think, they have a low threshold, and I have to be super tough with them as well. And I have to remind myself as well that, they have a hard life. And therefore, and they're losing microbes. They're missing microbes themselves. So
Yeah.
I have to be more patient with them to take care of their kids and to help them. But, it's so the
It
whole,
takes a village.
it takes a village, it takes a community, really a community. Think about the farmer that's bringing the milk to the house of this woman, right? Think about the yogurt that needs to be perfect and have bifidobacteria in there. I was talking to a woman who is, in the food industry, and early on in the pandemic, she had breast cancer stage 4, and I helped her with it. She survived stage 4 breast cancer, but it was hard. But she owned a yogurt, and I tested her yogurt and found no bifidobacteria. But on the label, it said bifidobacteria. Now, this woman could have continued to sell the yogurt, but instead she did the right thing. She said, this yogurt is not helping people like me. Therefore, it's not helping kids with autism. It's not helping others. I want to make a yogurt that's actually better. And I want to follow Dr. Hazan. And just today before this, I was talking to her, because kudos to her. She listened.
Yeah.
She spent millions on the proper research for the proper yogurt. And now she has a yogurt that I can support because guess what? It's gonna be a game changer, I'm sure, for some people.
Yeah.
And here's the beauty of this. She said to me, look, I'm willing to keep testing to make sure that we have quality, because the one thing I realized during the pandemic, was the lack of quality.
Yeah.
When I go to a pharmacy and I buy a generic vitamin and there's arsenic in the vitamin, there's a problem.
Yeah.
When I buy a chocolate and there's arsenic in the chocolate, there's a problem, right? Because
Right.
think about the kid with autism who's eating that chocolate. So now it's
Not to
great that
mention our non-organic chickens and rice, for that
I
matter, when
mean,
we're
we
talking
could
about
go on.
arsenic. We
Our
could go on
rice,
and on. Exactly.
we could go on and on, but just at the vitamin level, think about what the pandemic was: a virus. A virus, we've always been taught, load up on your vitamin C and vitamin D.
Yeah.
But if the vitamin C and D is contaminated,
True.
what are you going to do? I mean, I had to create my own vitamins because I'm paranoid. I tell the factory, I'm like, I'm going to be testing these batches every time you send me. If I find copper or arsenic, I'm going to have your head. So, because I'm taking them and I'm giving them to my kids.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with this woman that started the yogurt. She started it for her and realized that yogurt was hurting her, and then did the right thing. And she even said to me, she has a hard time finding investors now, but she's doing the right thing because it's much easier to sell a drink that says, hey, this drink is good for your gut health, without showing the data, than to show the data, do the research, and then sell the product. So,
Right.
because now that product is competing with other products that didn't do the right research. And
Right.
so corporate America is going to squish that product
Yeah.
to destroy it. So this is
Yeah.
why podcasts like this are so important. Speaking at, events like Cancer Schmancer with Fran Drescher
Yeah.
and Jane Fonda being there was important. Speaking to oncologists at the WIN Consortium, exposing the corruption in the publications, the corruption in the food industry, in our foods. Think about who's testing that yogurt. No one.
Right.
Even the study, and by the way, even me, when I did the study showcasing 3 out of 26 yogurts have bifidobacteria, everybody asked me, which ones are they? The reason I cannot say it is because I am not the sheriff to all the probiotic drinks in the
Right.
market, okay? And I tested in my local store in Malibu, 26 yogurts. That doesn't mean if the yogurt in my Malibu store of this brand X has 0 bifidobacteria, but the one of the same brand in South Carolina has bifidobacteria, it's not, I can't just blame the brand. And by the way, one of the drinks I later found out that tested negative in California tested positive for bifidobacteria in North Carolina. So, what was used? What was the
Right.
processing? What was the milk that was used? So all that is important. So we cannot, as people that have a stage or an influence the wrong way, because then we
Right.
destroy a company. So we have to do due diligence. So what I started doing in my lab, actually, rather than busting these companies, and since these companies are not always on the forefront of testing, I said, hey, I'm going to develop a test where people can just test their yogurt themselves. Call
That's great.
Progenabiome, test your yogurt, couple $100, test your yogurt and have the confidence
Yeah.
that this is what it's doing. And so that's really the one thing we've kind of developed, and that's that's in the
Yeah,
nutrition.
which is
It
great.
it empowers the population to basically say, you know what? I want to know.
Yeah.
Every time we look at these products, is there arsenic in there? And the label misleads the consumer. Here's bifidobacteria in a probiotic, but 16 out of 17 probiotics on the market don't even have bifidobacteria.
Right.
Do you know that when I go test the probiotics that I give my patients, we're testing the microbiome before and after. But before I even give them, I go to the factory to check the factory. I do my own due diligence. And I think it's important because you need to know who the owner is. You need to know whether they're righteous. You need to know whether they're clean. I don't
Right.
want to go to a factory where the pipes have not been changed in 20 years and now you've got copper from the pipes going into my products.
Right. Right.
So
Very
all that is
important.
important.
But you talk about the quality of yogurt, of the quality of the products that you have, of the lack of quality in some we can get in other places. And you talked about the donor component. How do you um, emphasize or make sure of the quality of the donor? I mean, it's such an important piece of the fecal
S-
transplant.
So we've developed kind of a formula,
Okay.
having seen so many thousands of stools, where we can kind of say, but of course, all this, the microbiome is in its infancy, right?
Yes.
I always say, you want to understand the microbiome, you have to attain a cure. And in order to attain a cure, you have to practice the art of medicine, which is really a gut feeling, right? Think about what I
Pun
did during.
intended.
Yeah, but it's true. It's like
Yeah.
almost you're guided, right?
Yeah.
Think about what I did during COVID. I had a patient that was on my clinical trial for COVID for a treatment protocol that we pushed. Remember, we were the ones that pushed the hydroxy Z-Pack, vitamin C, D, and zinc as a protocol.
Yeah.
It's not something that and by the way, someone offered me $10 million for that protocol. And I said, not until I see the data. When I saw that it kills the virus, but it also kills your microbiome, I was like, this is not something that's for everyone.
Yeah.
Vice versa, we also ran the ivermectin doxycycline zinc. This was a idea of Dr. Tom Barodi.
Right.
But ivermectin doxycycline didn't kill the virus in everyone, but it did increase the bifidobacteria within 20%. Within 24 hours, I'm sorry. So, what did I learn on the front line? I had a patient that was crashing. He was on my protocol, got placebo. After the fact, we found out. I didn't know whether he got the real drug at the time because I was blinded. So I didn't know if he got the real hydroxy or the placebo. I was panicking. He was going to the hospital. His oxygen was in the 60s. He had ivermectin because I gave it to him as a just in case. And he had 36 milligrams of ivermectin on hand. And I basically said to him, and I was talking to Dr. Barodi about this too. I go, my guy's crashing. I don't know if he got the placebo or not. And he's like, nothing wrong with giving 36 milligrams of ivermectin. I'm like, really? That's a lot. So I basically tell the guy, because I knew the studies with Merck when they did the scabies with ivermectin, because actually my sister was the one that brought ivermectin to market doing the clinical trials on scabies and lice. And
Interesting.
so I knew it needed to be given with fat. So I go, why don't you stop by a fast food store, get some French fries, and take all 36. He arrives at the hospital, and this is an overweight gentleman, diabetes, was crashing. He arrives at the hospital, and the oxygen was 92%. Now, people are like, oh, the oximeter didn't work. No, no, no. We tested. We kept on testing it. I was so worried about this guy that I was on the phone with him with his oxygen. So I saw the oximeter increasing, and and one of the fun things that I did during the pandemic with all these people that crashed, and by the way, that's when you see the power of God, right? When a patient crashes and you have the confidence to take a picture of that oximeter, and then you give the patient the treatment, and then you realize the oximeter increases and you take a picture with that patient after.
Yeah.
And that's what I think got me a lot of following on X, and back then it was Twitter, because I was showcasing the pictures, and I was also saying, pray for me, people, because I have a patient with an oxygen of 72%. Pray, 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 right? And I have to say prayers work, because the power of humanity coming together to pray, and thank God for all the people that have prayed for me. Because really it was a gut feeling, right?
Yeah.
It was giving that 36 milligram, having the courage to give it, testing the stools of the patient 24 hours later,
Right.
and seeing, wait a minute, this guy had zero bifidobacteria. Of course, he's diabetic, he's not absorbing sugar, important microbe in absorption of sugar. Of course, he's overweight. We saw loss of bifidobacteria in overweight patients. So basically, we discovered that, when you gave the 36 milligrams, the bifidobacteria increased.
Yeah.
So we started with the hypothesis, and it started on the front line, and it helped me discover the microbiome, because I took the courage to basically treat this patient, and he's still alive, thankful. But here's the thing, if I didn't do that, if I didn't practice with my gut feeling, and this is where interference in research shouldn't be happening.
Right.
Interference in medicine should not be happening.
Yeah.
It is a patient-doctor relationship, and I think a lot of the frustration that happens in medicine is because doctors are trying to innovate. They're trying to find different solutions that are safe without hurting the patient. They have a relationship with the
Right.
patient. They've seen something work with an N of one, and then patients come to them trusting
Right.
them. I think when we started interfering with that, making, guidelines are great to
Right.
protect the doctors, but guidelines are not the art of medicine.
Exactly.
Guidelines are just there to guide the doctor onto what others have done and all the clinical research that has gone. But
Right.
the moment you start interfering with the innovation, you just
Right.
kill the research.
Right.
And the
And it's
moment you
made people not curious, not wanting to look for the answers the way that
It's
you
also
do. And
yes, it's also made doctors scared of
yeah,
practicing medicine. And
yeah,
here's what happens with that. Because this is an important topic, and this is something that I think, I don't talk too much about. But I think, when you look at the cases that improve, you see the magic. But not only that, you see the microbiome. And what I wanted to say was, what we saw with the corruption of the papers being retracted, doctors like Dr. Wafik El-Dari, who is the head of oncology at Brown University, spearheads a consortium with other oncologists trying to find answers. When his data becomes of precision medicine becomes criticized by non-scientists, you have to kind of say what's going on there, right?
right.
And they do that on purpose. They put
Yes.
you on stage to destroy you because it affects the price of the stock. And ultimately, we have to have the courage. Medicine takes courage. It takes
Yes.
courage to save a life. So the case that I was going to tell you before we bring up the twins is a kid that came to me with seizures and 100 seizures. The father was a prominent neurosurgeon. And the father said he had gone to 9 neurosurgeons. The kid was bedridden with 100 seizures day and night. And the father came to me and I said to him, I think this is what we need to do with your kid. And he said to me, he goes, "You're going to do what on my kid? I mean, there's no studies on this." And I said, "Well, frankly, you don't have a choice because guess what? Your kid is bedridden. She's having seizures and nobody can help you. If you could find someone that can help you, go for it. But right now you're in my office. This is what I'm seeing. And this is what I believe we should do." Right. And I put her on a strict protocol and I manipulated the microbiome in a way. Anyways, the kid has no seizures now. Okay. She's thriving.
Yeah.
This is a kid that would have headed towards autism. And the father, it was an eye opener for him because he said to me, he goes, "I never understood that there's a brain gut connection. You're making me rethink
Yeah.
all these drugs that I gave all these years." But here's the problem. This is an uncomfortable position for him, right?
Yes.
Because now it's challenging his own beliefs, right? Much like when you tell a pediatrician, "Hey, maybe there's something wrong with the vaccine," right? It's like you're taking that Band-Aid and they're in pain and they want the Band-Aid back because they don't know how to heal their skin, right?
Yeah.
So this is the problem, that uncomfortable feeling of instead of going to, let's look for something better. Let's acknowledge there could be a problem. Think about where we would be right now if we didn't acknowledge that antibiotics had a huge role to play in killing the diversity that created C. diff.
Right.
And antibiotics was not the answer to C. diff because it's not about killing the
Right.
microbe. It's about replenishing it. Stop
Right.
killing, start bringing on. Stop hating, start loving. It's a lesson for humanity. And I think the microbiome is there as the light at the end of the tunnel, not only for COVID, but also for peace, for division. Look, you can hate all you want the other political party, but the other political party is going to become patients as well. And ultimately, each of them in those groups are missing microbes that they need to understand because they're going to be the patients. So it doesn't matter what your political stand is, who you support, which company you support. At the end of the day, it's an uncomfortable feeling to say, I'm wrong. But when you're wrong, you have to admit you're wrong and you have to see a better way.
Right.
Because you're going to be the one impacted when you're the patient.
Right.
When venture capitalists believed, in supporting the stock of Pfizer and Moderna, and then they come to me to find them stools to fix them, I say to them, where were you during COVID? Why didn't you look at this, with all of it? Why didn't you look
Right.
at the data with all the side effects? Why didn't you make an informed consent, an informed decision whether that was the right stock? Why didn't you look at the animal studies that were rushed? Why didn't you understand the virus better? So, when you want to make an informed, I have no problem with people getting vaccinated or people taking drugs or people drinking alcohol for that matter. But guess what? Freedom of choice, right?
Right.
You know the risk, right? When you're flying an airplane, when you're flying a helicopter, in the fog, the risk, right?
Right.
I mean, there are risk versus consequence. There are risk versus benefits, right? Sure, you're going to get faster there, but what's the risk, right?
Right.
Sure, you're going to be taking on that drink that makes you feel happier, but what's the risk long term?
Right.
We need to assess risk versus benefits. We need to be able to make informed consent. And at the end, we shouldn't have government judging us. We shouldn't have celebrities judging us because we made that choice. That's my choice.
Right.
Freedom of choice.
And it
That's
goes back to the freedom of choice between the doctor and the patient also. Having that choice to be able to say, this drug, this, fecal transplant, this whatever will work better for my patient because I know them, as opposed to what you were saying about the protocols and the guidelines and all of
Yes.
that.
I had a great lesson in residency where I had a Jehovah's Witness who I watched die to a hemoglobin of 3.
Yeah.
I didn't think you could live with a hemoglobin of 3. But I tried everything to save that kid. I went into the committee of the hospital to try to save that kid. But ultimately, it was the decision of the kid and the parents and whatever their beliefs are. It wasn't up to me to change that path, right? It's not up to me to change the path of a person that believes that, they don't want to take DNA from other people, or they don't want to take blood from other people because it's not what they were taught. Much like it's not my role to persuade people to eat like I do.
Yeah.
You do you, I do me, and you have a responsibility and you made a choice and that's your choice. And you're going to have, at the end of your life, you're going to be on your bed saying, I coulda, shoulda, woulda. The number one reason, by the way, that I stepped into the microbiome is because and spent all this money, because it was a lot of money, was really, I want to be the girl that said, I coulda, shoulda, woulda,
Yeah.
Figured out the microbiome, but now I have Alzheimer's and I didn't figure it out, I wanted to be on the forefront. And if I don't figure it out, at least I would say I tried.
Yeah.
It's always, I think nobody's going to fault a doctor for trying to save their lives. Think about all the doctors that used hydroxy and ivermectin and all sorts of things. Nobody sued them because they tried to save them, right?
Yeah.
But there were lawsuits of people because doctors did not want to give ivermectin in a hospital setting. So lawyers were involved in that,
Yeah.
I think ultimately it's we've put the doctor in such a box and we've handcuffed them because of the politics, because of the fear factor, that now they're stuck. And
Yeah.
they're following these guidelines because they're afraid of getting sued.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that's why we're in the mess we're in,
Yeah.
because we've remove the confidence that a doctor's supposed to have. And it gets, again, it gets misinterpreted as arrogance. Oh my God, my doctor is so arrogant. You know, when I needed to do in vitro, I went to the best doctor that wrote the book on in vitro to get pregnant. And that doctor um, appeared arrogant, but it wasn't arrogance. He was just so confident because he
Yeah.
had gotten women pregnant with
Right.
in vitro. And so he saw, and every time a woman would get pregnant, he would get confidence from that. Doesn't mean he got every woman, pregnant with in vitro, but at least, he tried. And he became a leader in the field because he tried. I think we need to put those doctors on stage more.
Yeah.
The Dr. Barodi of the world, the Dr.
Yeah.
Feingold of the world. I don't want to see Academy Awards. I want to see doctors that have changed healthcare. Wafik El-Dari, his
Right.
work on P53. Dr. Barodi, his work on fecal transplant. Dr. Paul Furstad, at Yale, his work on the microbiome. Sahil Khanna, his work on the microbiome and chronic urinary tract infection.
Yeah.
Colleen Kelly, Brown University, 2 cases of alopecia areata improved. Alex Karutz, the first stool bank available. That doesn't mean they have all the answers, but they were brave enough to try. I
Right.
want to see those doctors being acknowledged. I want to see those the scientists behind the BRCA gene be acknowledged, not just the businessman pushing that,
Right.
So I think that's the world that I want to see. And I think, if we change healthcare, that's how we do it, to give courage again to doctors to innovate. The microbiome is a very complicated problem. It's not a one pill or one microbe problem. We're seeing it with autism.
Yeah.
Every day I intercept a microbe and I'm like, I didn't know this microbe released toxins. Every day I ask myself, I didn't know this microbe was good. I
Yeah.
thought it was bad. Or the other way, I thought this microbe was good, but
Yeah.
now it's bad at this level, right?
But it's not about that one microbe. It's about the whole
community.
diversity and the community and who their friends
Community.
are and what they're doing. So much so.
And by the way, that's the same in a community, right? You have one bad egg that keeps on talking wrong about people, and it's up to the community to kind of like straighten that bad egg and say,
Right.
hey, dude, what are you eating? Maybe you should
Right.
clean up your house. Your house smells like mold.
But it's only about all of us communicating like our microbes do to be
Yes.
able to get that information out there. And speaking of getting that information out there, before we have to end today, can you just talk a little bit about your
Yes.
upcoming twin study
Yes.
research? Because I think that's so key for our PANS-PANDAS population.
Yeah. So one of the things that we, push in research of the microbiome is the validation, the verification, the reproducibility, right?
Yep.
And we were able to reproduce, showcasing 2 identical twins microbiome, exact microbes. And I was able to remove these microbes because when you do fecal transplant, you have to understand, you have to kill the microbe first, unfortunately, because it's like a weed.
Yeah.
I compare the microbiome to the garden. You have a garden full of weeds. You have to remove the weeds. Then you have to turn the earth. In other words, in the colon, it's like removing the biofilm that's got all these, toxins and drugs and pesticides on it. So you have to kind of clean it without killing the colon or the colonic mucosa. Because one of the mistakes that people do is they hear a talk like this and they go, oh my God, I got to go through the biofilm. And they go to the pharmacy and they find these biofilm busters. Please do not use biofilm busters. You're killing your whole entire colon, and then you're going to come in with an inflamed colon where nothing can engraft. Because here's the problem. It's not only about engraftment at the microbes and the compatibility of the microbiome. It's also the mucosa. Why is the mucosa not latching onto these microbes? What's going on there? Do I need to fix the inflammation first in the colonic mucosa, then implant, right? So that's why it's important to do step-by-step approach and understand every patient is different and understand that every case is different to fix that patient, right? So,
So
you,
agree.
yeah, so these two twins, the mom trusted me. She flew in from Tennessee and basically came with her twins. They were running around my practice like, chickens without heads, and they were like rummaging and not speaking, nonverbal. My staff saw all that. And so we started working with the family. And the mom basically trusted me because she saw the amount of money that I spent on my lab, and she saw how I was doing the research, and she saw I was the editor on the Microbiome of Practical Gastro, which is a journal that reaches 18,000 GI doctors. And so she saw all my work, my publications, my coming out, all this, going, all these podcasts. And she trusted me. And as we were, helping these kids, after 9 months, well, we saw it early, like they started beginning. So what I do with families is I start working early on with them, and then if I see progress, I tell the parents we continue. And if I see some engraftment and removal of those microbes, we continue. So the paper and the abstract is going to be shown at ACG, showcasing really the disappearance of these microbes and then the appearance of good bacteria. And then these kids verbalize, these kids are speaking, reading. It's amazing. It was amazing to see. But the mom literally had to, push me to do it because, when you're doing something cutting edge, it's outside the box, and it's something that you don't really have a protocol. Doctors have been, when you look at primary cares mix medications all day long. They give a cholesterol pill, they give a hypertension pill, they give the omegas, they give all this. No, the FDA doesn't come to them and say, hey, you need to create a consortium of one pill, right? They're allowed to do that. In oncology now, as I was speaking with Dr. Elderi, it's the same thing they're trying to do. They're trying to combine chemo drugs. And they're like, why do we need the FDA to tell us how to combine drugs? I mean, primary cares have done it all along. So if Dr. X wants to give this immunotherapy and Dr. Z wants to give this, yeah, let's combine it. Let's see if there's better in improving, and let's work smarter at improving the life, because ultimately these guys are on the front line, right? When you talk about the head of Yale, the head of MD Anderson, the head of Harvard, they're the buck stops with them. So the patient comes in with a glioblastoma, they're counting on the head of Harvard to fix them. And they'll donate and they'll spend money on Harvard to fix them. So these guys are in a strange position where they have to start investigating new trials, new drugs, new innovations. And how do they do that? They go back to the classroom to see with the scientist in the lab. Hey, what have you been seeing? They look at novel new therapy. When I presented my data on the microbiome and the importance of bifidobacteria in cancer, I can tell you they all paid attention. And here's the interesting thing about this whole research of bifidobacteria and the microbiome. It's a new field that no doctor really understands well. How many doctors know that your probiotics, if you turn the bottle and look at the label, the bacteria is bifidobacteria? I bet you the majority of doctors out there, especially those that are not really into the, naturopath, functional medicine,
Functional medicine.
non-functional medicine doctors, they don't know. I mean, I can tell you, I educated a lot of doctors in bifidobacteria, and, I thank God for conferences like ILADS, TACA, Summit, A4M, MAPS. Thank God for these conferences, documenting hope. Thank God for these conferences that open up the minds of doctors, and doctors go to these conferences to learn something else. When the head of an academic center, very prominent academic center in GI, calls me and says, Sabine, which conference should I go to educate myself on being more functional medicine? I that I took that as a compliment because I felt
Yeah.
like, you know what? By me listening to her research, by me listening to her data, and her wanting to see what I'm doing in the functional medicine world, it got her to my path.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to do. I think having been a Malibu physician for all these years, my clientele doesn't want cookie cutter medicine.
Yeah.
They want in the kitchen. What am I supposed to be eating? They didn't want, and that was a big lesson for me at the beginning of fecal transplant was, with Crohn's especially. My celebrities with Crohn's did not want to do biologics.
Yeah.
It's nothing against pharma. I mean, biologics work and they were great for the science and they're great for the science today. And they definitely have saved a lot of lives and are doing amazing work. But that clientele did not want. They wanted something different, something
Right.
outside the box that didn't keep them that didn't make them be, remind themselves that they're patients.
Right.
And, a friend of mine said to me, you attract as patients who you are. That's who I am as a patient. I'm going to be the girl that's going to try different things because I want to fix the problem. I don't want to be thinking, oh my God, I've got back pain. I'm going to
Right.
take this pill to numb the pain. I'm going to figure out what caused me the back pain. I'm going to get my tilt table, get myself on the tilt table with a vibratory mat, and I'm going to fix myself
Right.
outside the box because ultimately I don't want to be reminded every day that I have pain. And I
Right.
don't want to be reminded by taking pills that numb the pain. And I'd rather suffer in pain and remind myself that I'm a warrior
Right.
than numb the pain. But that's just me, right? This is freedom of choice. Some people don't like pain and they're like, give me the pills.
Right.
It's their choice. We're
But
not
it's
all lions, Some of us are gazelles, right? Some
right.
people are gazelle. We have to be sensitive to that.
Right.
The animal kingdom, whether animals or humans, are all different, and we have to be sensitive to the gazelles and the chickens and everything.
Right. But it's like you said, I mean, we can put a Band-Aid on things, which is what the pain medicine is, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But the root cause medicine, the not name it, blame it, tame it, but getting at the underlying problem that's causing the back problem is what we in functional medicine are trying to do. And the fact that doctor was listening to you as to what conference to go to, it's because you were listening to your patients. You were learning from the guy with Alzheimer's that got better with the fecal
Yes.
transplant. You were learning from the microbiome and really listening. And that's
And I
one of
was
the things we
also,
love about you. So,
thank you, but I was also learning from her, right? I mean,
yeah,
she contributed amazing work in research.
right.
I'm not going to be the one cutting down that work. We've got to acknowledge, science evolves. We
Yeah,
have to acknowledge the lessons. There was a Japanese physician that said he learns more from the mistakes than the successes.
yeah,
And I have to agree because with the mistake is where you learn. You
yeah,
learn how to be better. Like, how do I make my experiment better? What failed there? Why wasn't
right,
it reproducible?
right,
Always search for that answer. Don't be comfortable in, hey, I fixed 2 patients
right,
with alopecia areata. Be comfortable in saying, why didn't I fix 10 patients? Why
right,
did I just fix 2?
right.
What we do in clinical trials with pharma, which is a, a problem that I have with pharma, is we bring these substandard drugs that have a 20% success on, and that's great. They have 20%. And we made these pharmaceutical companies very strong and powerful, and we bring them money. But we should mandate that these pharmaceutical companies use the funds, a portion of the funds, to figure out what went wrong with the other 80%.
Right,
Why did your product work on 20%? Why didn't it work on the 80%?
right,
Figure it out.
right,
You're making billions right now. Why are you just pushing your drug? Figure it out. And I think if I had an advice to give Marty Makary at the FDA, it's exactly that. Mandate that pharmaceutical companies continue to understand why they don't have 100% success
yeah,
and to look at every failures and to understand what went wrong there.
yeah. Well, Sabine, I could talk to you for hours. It's
Thank
wonderful
you.
to talk to a fellow warrior. I am always amazed when I talk to people like you, how much we have in common and how much you do to help our world, whether it be the world of autism, the world of PANS PANDAS, just the world of our families. And our moms and dads are out there fighting and really appreciate all you're doing. So
And
two
thank
last
you.
things. How can people get in touch if they want to learn more or read your research? What is the
Everything
website they
is
should
on
go to?
progenabiome.com, progenabiome.com. So Progenabiome, our publications are there. Our podcast, this podcast will be there as well. Everything I do is on the website. I am also answering all the emails that come through that website. So it's a big job. Sometimes I'm behind on the emails. So don't feel sorry if you hear from me a month from now. It's probably because I got bombarded with 1,000 emails. But I try to answer all my emails personally. I send those that can be easily triaged to like my staff. People that ask me, what just questions, I send them to my staff, but usually I answer and I try to answer all the emails. Um, that's basically how you can reach me, progenabiome.com. Contact me in there. The book Let's Talk Shit is on the website. It's on Barnes and Noble and on Amazon. I recommend for everybody to at least read it to get an idea
Yes.
of what the microbiome is, and also what antibiotics are. I don't think people understand how antibiotics were made and created. And, we live in a world of everything is top secret. And that's because that's how companies protect their products. But at the end of the day, we need to still advance the research and
Yeah.
understand the basics. What is
Yeah.
a monoclonal antibody? What is a biologic? What is a antibiotic?
Yeah.
What is a vaccine even? So I
Yeah.
think it's important. Education is strength. Education allows us to live longer. AI has its flaws, but on the whole, I like Grok. Grok is actually pretty good. So it's helpful, but don't use it as the gold standard because there are a lot of mistakes on AI still. It's
Sure.
not there yet. So that's pretty much how you can reach me.
Well, Dr. Hazan, thank you again. I look
Thank you.
forward to seeing you in many places in the future. And we so appreciate you being on this podcast. And we'll see you all again on Demystifying PANS PANDAS.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of Demystifying PANS PANDAS. I hope you're walking away with insights, tools, and hope to help you and your child on this journey. If you found today's conversation valuable, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Share this podcast with anyone who might need it. It could be the lifeline they're searching for. And if you have a moment, leaving a review helps us reach even more families who deserve answers. Also, for more information, training, and community, check out our website, drohara.com, and join our annual membership. And remember, every step forward, no matter how small, brings us closer to healing and understanding. Until next time, be present, be hopeful, and we look forward to seeing you next time on Demystifying PANS PANDAS.